mentioned there also is a diverse background. Uh, in general, you mentioned that there's something culture about that lacking this kind of creative thinking. But let's talk about what's going on in China, particularly in terms of in relation with how the CCP has influenced people's mind thinking. Maybe you can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's it. I was over there studying the martial art, and from there I can go into the culture, and from the culture then to better understand the economy. So I'm an economist, and I did another 3 years of studies at School of Economics, Shanghai University. But yes, the CCP, in order for a communist government to function, and this is every communist government that's ever existed, they destroyed the religion. You have to take away the religion. Because with the religion, the people have a belief in something higher, something greater. But the party wants you to only have, the party is the greatest thing. And your belief is in the party, and your trust is in the party. So they can't have you believing in God. Right? So I can, as a religious person, say, even I've had a gun pointed at me, or I've been threatened, and I said, no matter what you do to me, I know that I have a higher power that protects me. And if I die today, I know that's where I'm going. So I'm not afraid of you. But if you take that away, now people can be put into fear or controlled by the party. So that's number one. Number two, destroy the family. You have to destroy the family because your adherence, your loyalty, your love has to be for the party, not your family. Because again, if you look at Chinese history, we used to have these families, these clans. The more children you had, the more sons you had, the bigger your business could be. You could put your son as the manager of this branch and that branch and the other branch, and then you knew that he wasn't going to steal from you because he's your son, and you became very powerful. You had powerful dynasties. Okay, and that's where the dynasties came from. So when you have the communist revolution, we're going to fight against the dynasties because it's not fair to everyone else. That's what they're saying, but actually what they're saying is if you have a family that you can rely on, you're not going to be dependent on the CCP. So they destroyed the family. And China, overtly destroyed the family by saying one child. Now, before I went to China, I knew that they only had one child. Everybody knew that. And I thought about all the ramifications of that. There's a lot of Westerners who write about that. When I got to China, it took me a while, it took about a year. And suddenly it hit me. I said, wait, they've only had one child for 40 years, 50, well, at this point, 60 years. That means your mother and father were only children. That means you don't have aunts and uncles. That means you don't have cousins. What? Right? Because a generation ago or whatever, okay, you didn't have brothers and sisters, or maybe you had cousins, you had somebody. Today, what do you have? You have mother, father, and 4 grandparents, and that's your family. And the grandparents, of course, will die. And they're not working. And they're not going to go out and change anything about the world. You have nobody. Nobody but the party. And that's what they want. And every communist government has done it, but China did it in the most overt fashion. Yeah.
So how does that impact the everyday life, and how does that impact the maybe athletic development in China? Maybe you can talk about both.
Yeah, if you look at psychological research that's done on families in America or Europe, and I'm just speaking from America because that's my experience, but this is everywhere in the world. There's a lot of research about birth order. Like I'm the youngest of 5 children, but I'm a boy. So the boy who's the youngest of 5 children is usually cared for by the other 4, and so they tend to be more irresponsible or something like this. The oldest of 5 children tends to be more responsible because they they take care of the younger siblings, and the parents rely on them to run chores and errands. You got a whole generation of kids, 2 generations that are only children. They don't have to take care of anybody. They don't have to share anything. My family was poor when I was growing up. We have 5 children. We shared everything. These kids in China, only child, never had to share anything with anyone. It's amazing. And amazing was that during COVID, when I would get in arguments with Wu Mao, or when I was in China studying, they would say, oh, in America, everybody's so selfish. Everybody's so self-centered. I'm like, you are all only children. You've never shared anything. We had a box next to the door in winter. There was a box next to the door of our home that had hats, gloves, jackets. Whoever got there first put it on and went outside, because we just shared whatever was there. So if you got there first, you got the best one. And if you got there first, sometimes you didn't take the best one because the younger brother or sister should have the best one. And that's how we lived. Nobody growing up in China today had that experience.
What's the consequence of that?
Well, they never learn to share. It's very self-centered. They can't cooperate. In team sports or teams, when you have like team building exercises, amazingly, people from individualistic cultures work better in a team than people from collectivist cultures.
There's a paradox.
It seems like a paradox, but when you do like business training, and we found this a lot in Taiwan, because in Taiwan it was easier to do this type of research, socioeconomic and socio research, and so there would be like team building exercises in Taipei for companies and things like this, or the Chicago company versus the Taiwan branch or something, and in China too. But what we found was that across Asia, we found that in Korea and other countries where people are, allegedly this collectivist culture, they're actually very bad at working in teams, whereas people from individual cultures are able to work in teams better.
Why is that?
There's a lot of reasons. I think if you look at American football, I believe sports are an analogy for everything. If you look at American football, the team is very big, and it is a team, and you win or lose as a team. However, every member of the team has one very specialized job. And if you compare American football to like rugby, which sort of looks similar, the team is dramatically smaller in rugby, and the players, rugby, yeah, like Australian and British, they play a game that looks like American football called rugby, but the teams are much smaller. So on a man-for-man basis, they always argue our athletes are better shape and more diverse. They can do different things. But in America, it's although we're on a team, you have a very individual role. So you still feel very proud, like I did my job very well, and that makes the team win. But you still feel like a star. Whereas in a collectivist culture, they try not to make anybody feel like a star. So what happens is everybody tries to be a star, and then it hurts the performance of the group.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. I never thought of it in that way. But when it comes to martial art, isn't that quite individual quest?
Yes, yeah, martial art is definitely more of an individual quest.
But how does that put into that context you just described?
So this is again this dichotomy. So wrestling is my absolute love. It's my favorite sport, and it's what I've been concentrating on ever since I became a professional MMA fighter. And I lived in Mongolia, where wrestling is king. And with wrestling, you have weight divisions. So you're on a team, you're working together, but you have weight divisions. And I'm the 80-kilogram wrestler, and this is the 90-kilogram, and so again, you're on a team, but you have this individual moment to shine where you go out there alone. And you're going to go out there alone, and your name will be on the board. But you came as a team, and the team members never compete with each other because they're all different weights. I'm not competing with you. I'm competing with my opponent. You're competing with your opponent. And I understand your struggle, and I can support you, and you can support me. So again, we wind up with this individual effort that somehow collectively creates a collective performance as a team. And I'm an economist. If we look at social economy, we look at a centrally planned communist economy, China. Everyone should work together for the common good. Okay, other than China, the only thing that communism has ever achieved was to make almost everyone equally poor. Right? Everybody was poor. They're equal, but they're poor, except for like the 2 or 3% that are part of the party that are unbelievably rich and privileged, right? But everybody else is poor. You look at a capitalist country, everybody complains. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. But the reality is the middle class is huge. Middle class only exists in capitalist countries. There was no middle class in Russia. There was no middle class in Vietnam. There was no middle class in the old China. When did middle class even come into existence in China? After Deng Xiaoping, after the liberalization of the economy. Why? Because they allowed the private sector to develop and to have incentives. And what we found out was humans are greedy, horrible creatures. Everybody works for their own benefit. However, in a capitalist society, if we all work for our own benefit, we all work to make ourselves rich, what happens to the whole country? The whole country becomes rich. Right? I start a company because I want to be rich. The richer I get, the bigger my company gets. The bigger my company gets, the more jobs I'm creating for my countrymen. The better my company operates, the more efficiently my company operates, the cheaper I can make my products, or the better I can make my product, because I want to compete with the other guy who's also greedy. Well, what does that do? That produces a cheaper, better product for everyone in the country. When I was a student in Germany in the 90s, I knew Germany was a rich, developed country. America is a rich, developed country. I got to Germany. I could not believe the difference in how much stuff people owned. Americans have 100 times more stuff than Germans. Our homes are bigger. Every member of the family has a car. The poor, all but the bottom maybe 5 or 10% of poor people, not the bottom 5 or 10% of the society, but all but maybe the bottom 5 or 10% of poor people still own a car, still have stuff in their head. They have a sofa. They have more than one pair of jeans. I got to Germany, people had one pair of jeans and one pair of dress trousers, and sometimes men working in the office would wear the same suit every day. You just don't find that. We have so much more stuff. Why? Because of capitalism. And you don't have that in China. China is the #2 economic power in the world, and yet the average Chinese person qualifies as below median income in the United States, below poverty level in the United States. The poverty level in America is higher than the average income in China. That is madness. When Britain was #1 and America was #2, in both countries, people had a really nice standard of living. When America became #1 and Britain was both countries had a nice standard of living. China's #2 now, and this is how people are living. 30% of rural Chinese still do not have indoor plumbing. When I was at Shaolin Temple, one of the kids, the father apparently was a rich brothel owner, you know, he was like a rich gangster in, a neighboring village. And we went there. He's the richest man in the village. He has the biggest house in the village, and they had outdoor plumbing. And they didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have central heating. And he's a rich guy. I went in his house. The wallpaper was very expensive. The whole house is made of concrete block. Just the ugliest, most horrible, and this is because he's a rich guy, and this is how you live. And this is what China is. This is what central planning does. It creates this poverty. When China says, oh, we lifted 800 million people out of poverty, why did you have 800 million people living in poverty? In 1977, you had 800 million people living in poverty. The average income in China in 1978, 79, 80 was lower than 19th century in the United States or Great Britain.